The Centurion Action 10 is the most recent addition to the British Ground Forces tech tree, and it's just what everyone wanted, another premium Centurion. Alright lads, today I'm going to be talking about the weapons, performance and usage of the newly released Centurion Action 10, followed by a conclusion at the end of the video. The Action 10 is a rank 4 battle rating 6.7 medium tank, with a 570% RP modifier, as well as a 420% Silverline modifier. This tank is of course a premium vehicle, and will set you back roughly 6,090 Golden Eagles, which will cost you roughly €34 if you purchase them through Golden Eagle packs. As this tank is not purchased from the Guardian store, you do not get the additional premium time and Golden Eagles as found with other premium vehicle packs. The development of the Centurion Action 10 begins in the late 1950s, when Leyland Motors were experimenting with both a reclined driver's position and turrets without a gun mantlet. The tank Leyland produced was the FV4202, which we already have in game. This was a proof of concept for many of the revolutionary new ideas of British tank designers. These ideas were built upon and perfected, which resulted in the FV4201, more commonly known as the Chieftain main battle tank. However, before Chieftain was finished, designers believed the Centurions already in service could be upgraded by creating a new turret without a gun mantlet. They basically modified the existing FV4202 turret and placed it on a Centurion Mark 7 hull. This is the tank we have in game as a Centurion Action 10. In real life, two turrets were made, one with a 20-pounder gun and one with the famous Royal Ordnance L7 105mm gun. It was envisioned that all Centurions past the Centurion Mark 7 would receive this new turret, however that did not come to pass. Of the two turrets produced, only one was ever fitted to a tank. The other turret was possibly used for gunnery trials, testing the armour performance against a series of different weapons. Because of only two turrets being produced, and it never going into full production, there are no surviving Action 10 tanks. However, there is a turret located at the Bovington Tank Museum. To summarise, the Action 10 is essentially an unchanged Centurion hull with a redesigned turret. The Action 10 is powered by the Rover-built Rolls-Royce Meteor engine, as found on the Cromwell and Comet tank series. This engine produces 650 horsepower, which combined with the Action 10's weight of 51 tons, gives this vehicle a rather awful 12.7 horsepower to ton ratio. With this engine you do have a decent top speed of 35 km per hour, and by British standards, you have an excellent reverse speed of 12 km per hour. The acceleration is acceptable, but could be a lot better. But the real issue with this tank is its turning. If you try and turn even slightly when accelerating, you will bleed a lot of speed. Honestly, driving this tank through urban areas with twists and turns and hills is like driving a fucking mouse. You do at least get neutral steering, which does help a little bit, but the performance is still incredibly sluggish. And in my opinion, driving the Action 10 feels very similar to driving the King Tiger. Its poor power to weight ratio means it struggles to compete with other contemporary medium tanks of other nations. And to be honest, the Action 10 is essentially a medium tank with heavy tank levels of manoeuvrability. The hull of this tank is essentially a clone of the Centurion Mark III already found in game, which means it has the same poor hull armour. The front of the hull is well sloped at 57 degrees and is free from any weak spots, like machine guns or driver's hatches. The problem is that the upper frontal plate is only 3 inches thick, or 76mm. With its sloping, it has an effective thickness of 126mm, which at battle rating 6.7 is only really proof against SBAGs. The lower frontal plate, which is also 3 inches thick, is well sloped at 45 degrees, giving it a slightly lower effective thickness of 125mm. The side of the tank are 2 inches thick, or 50mm, and are unsloped. This makes you incredibly vulnerable to German SBAGs, especially the Kugelpanzer. These shortcomings are the exact same as the non-premium Centurion Mark III. The real difference of armour comes from when we look at the turret. First of all, while this turret is a substantial improvement over the production Centurion turret, it still isn't really good enough to warrant a difference in playstyle. Keeping that in mind, if we start by looking at the bottom of the turret, we can see that it is basically flat, making its 152mm of thickness basically useless against contemporary guns. Moving slightly upwards to the middle of the turret, we see the turret thickness increase to 198mm, but again, it is flat and incredibly small. Moving out to the lower turret cheeks, thickness drops off rapidly, down to 98mm, and it has very little sloping. Moving up to the upper turret cheeks, we see they are only 76mm thick, but are well sloped at 43 degrees, giving them an effective thickness of 185mm. Finally, the upper part of the turret is where the real protection is. Like the upper turret cheeks, it only has a thickness of 76mm, but the removal of the gun mantlet allowed this part of the turret to be sloped at 70 degrees, giving it an effective armour thickness of 244mm. Both the sides and rear of this turret are 89mm thick, and have no sloping. The side and rear armour is pretty good, especially considering the Tiger II's turret side and rear are only 80mm thick. There is no doubt that this turret is a lot better than the turret found on the other Centurions. However, you cannot count on it to save you, as players with at least 2 working brain cells will either shoot your hull or just shoot the flat part of your turret face. If we take a look inside the tank, we can see our driver, gunner and commander are located on one side, making this tank an easy one-shot kill for any shell with good post-penetration damage effects, which is basically every German and Russian tank gun at 6.7. On the other side of the tank, we see a huge ammo rack, so your enemies have a choice: shoot to your left to kill all your crew via shrapnel, or shoot to your right and kill all of your crew via barbecue. The gun on the Centurion Action 10 is the same 20-pounder found on most of the 6.7 British tanks. The 84mm quick-firing 20-pounder Mark 1. This gun is the real selling point of the mid-tier British tanks. First of all, you get 4 different shell types. The first round is the Shock Mark 1. Just like almost all of the other British tanks, your stock shell is a solid armour-piercing shell with no explosive filler. It has 232mm of penetration at 10 meters, and even at 500 meters, you still get an excellent 216mm of penetration, and these rounds are still very effective at long range, as you have a muzzle velocity of 1000 meters per second. The second round is the Shot Mark 3. It is an armour-piercing discarding sabot round, the predecessor to the modern armour-piercing thin stabilised discarding sabot. It has 285mm of penetration at 10 meters, and is still capable of penetrating 218mm of penetration at a whopping 1500 meters away. And with a muzzle velocity of 1400 meters per second, they are incredibly easy to aim. Not only does the APDS round have more penetration than the regular AP round, it also performs much better against sloped armour. Whereas the armour-piercing round can bounce on armour sloped at an angle greater than 48 degrees, the APDS round will only bounce when armour's sloping exceeds 75 degrees. The downside of the APDS round is its post-penetration damage. It does not cause huge amounts of shrapnel like conventional armour-piercing rounds. This means you either have to aim for crew members or ammo racks. This can be quite hard for beginners, especially as different tanks have different ammo and crew positions. But once you master where and when to shoot tanks, you become incredibly powerful. The last 2 rounds are what I consider utility rounds. You get a standard high explosive shell, which I never ever take into battle. It only has 15mm of penetration and a fairly small warhead of 1.13kg of TNT equivalent. The last round is a smoke shell. It's pretty decent for what it is. It has a screen hold time of 20 seconds, and it could be used to blind enemies or create some cover for yourself. You do however get access to deployable smoke canisters, so these rounds aren't a necessity. As well as your great grounds, there are also other factors about the tank which contribute to this gun being amazing. Firstly, your stock reload is 8.1 seconds, and with crew training, the reload time is brought down to 6.3 seconds. This gives you an incredibly high fire rate compared to the other contemporary medium tanks at 6.7. For comparison, the German Panther II reloads every 9 seconds, and the Tiger II every 8 seconds, which means that if you and your enemy miss your first shots, you will have the advantage in reload. However, you will probably need to shoot your enemies more than once, and they will usually only need to shoot you once with their armour-piercing high explosive. The Centurion has another advantage over most of the German and Russian tanks, and that is gun stabilisation. The Action 10 has a fully stabilised gun, allowing it to fire on the move. This gives you an insane advantage over enemies when moving, and particularly when fighting around corners. The gun also has 10 degrees of gun depression as well as 20 degrees of elevation. The shell options, gun stabilisation, and excellent depression and elevation make this gun one of the best at its tier, and even in a full up tier, it is still incredibly powerful. When you spawn into a game, I would recommend setting the APDS as your default round. I personally do this, as I know whatever enemy I come across, the APDS will be able to penetrate it. The regular armour-piercing round is good, but in a full up tier, it may struggle to penetrate certain enemies, and you always want your first shot to be definitely going through. The poor engine performance really does limit your early game effectiveness, as you can't get yourself into a good early game flanking positions like a conventional medium tank. You also don't have the armour to bounce shots reliably, so you can't perform the role of frontline brawler. The additional turret armour is only on the top section of the turret, which isn't an area an enemy will target usually. This tank really excels at ridgeline fighting, and defensive play, especially if you can get into a hold down position. This is where your improved turret armour can be put to work, but there are a lot of maps that don't allow for this sort of play. And again, your poor mobility means you often can't get into forward aggressive hold down positions. You are however capable of penetrating pretty much everything on the battlefield, but you don't really have the one-shot reliability of conventional armour-piercing high explosive rounds. Because of this, I recommend targeting the gun breach or gunner of your enemies with your first shot, meaning that even if you do need to fire a second round, you don't have to worry about them shooting back at you. Being a 6.7 British tank, you also have a very strong lineup to bring to the battle. The Centurion Mark III, FV4202, Carnarvon and Charioteer are all excellent tanks, and all use the same amazing 20-pounder gun. The only real downside to the 6.7 British lineup is the lack of an effective anti-air gun. To conclude, the Centurion Action 10 is a good tank, but the things that make it good are not unique. Yes, the improved turret is a good upgrade, but the better turret armour isn't good enough to change the playstyle of this tank. The only real armour of the turret is the very top, and enemies are not likely to target this area, as it is visibly well sloped. It is useful for fighting over ridgelines, but most engagements in War Thunder usually involve your entire tank being exposed. The main positives of the Centurion Action 10 are the gun and the stabilisation, which is not unique. All the British tanks at 6.7 use the same gun and are fully stabilised. Its manoeuvrability does leave a lot to be desired. It is essentially a medium tank gun and medium tank armour, with the manoeuvrability of a heavy tank. But again, this criticism is relevant to all British tanks at 6.7. There is another British Rank 4 premium, the Stridsvagn 81, essentially another clone of a Centurion Mark III, but with the addition of basic anti-tank rockets. The Stridsvagn 81 comes in a pack on the Guardian store and is sold for roughly €40. This makes it more expensive than the Action 10, but it does come with premium time and bonus Golden Eagles. If I had to choose between the Stridsvagn 81 and the Action 10, I'd probably choose the Action 10. It has slightly better RP modifiers, and the extra turret armour does come in handy in hold down defensive positions. For people just starting grinding the British tech tree, I wouldn't recommend this tank. The gun is very powerful, but only when you understand ammo and crew layouts of enemy tanks. Instead, a low tier premium like the Cromwell Mark V may be a better option for starting players. For players who have already grinded the British tech tree, this tank is nothing new or special. If you aren't a fan of British tanks, there is no need to purchase this premium, as it offers nothing new in terms of ability or playstyle. I personally do like this tank and do not regret buying it. I'm a British main and play 6.7 Brits pretty regularly, so for me it's a great addition to my lineup. I hope you found this video useful, and thank you very much for watching.